Welcome back to our study of the book of Matthew. It's called Follow Me, Discipleship According to the book of Matthew, based on this book called Follow Me, Discipleship According to the book of Matthew, written by Martin Franzman, a professor from Lutheran seminaries. And we've been studying how Jesus draws us closer to himself and therefore makes us better followers of him. We're playing follow the leader. Jesus is the leader. And what we've seen the last few weeks is just how different Jesus' character and Jesus' will are compared to the will and the character of the people who oppose him in Jerusalem. So Jesus wants his will, what he wants to be is meek. That means he depends on God. He is humble. He wants to serve people, to be a minister, to serve them. He wants to have mercy. And the way Jesus shows his meek ministry of mercy is by giving his life to die on the cross. It will be a humiliating and humbling thing. It will bring him down into death, and then he will conquer death by his resurrection. And in doing so, he will be the victor over death and hell and Satan, and he will get our praise forever and ever. That's what we're looking forward to. And so Jesus says that's what should mold the disciples' hope. People who opposed him, they had something else in mind. People who opposed Jesus wanted him to maybe make sense of the ancient riddles that they found in the Bible. They maybe wanted him to give them some new laws or show them how they could keep the laws. Mostly they wanted him to defeat the Romans. They saw that in the past, King David had defeated the Philistines. In the past, they had great prophets who came and defeated their political enemies. And so God surely must be willing to defeat our political enemies, that is the Romans. They built their whole hope on a vain hope, a thing that God didn't promise. And so they built their whole lives around a will that Jesus would be a savior who God didn't promise. And when he didn't match up to what they wanted, they rejected Jesus. They pushed him away. It's a warning for us, and that's what we're going to get into today. Now, last week we saw Jesus make very clear the distinction between his will and other people's will. He told some parables saying, you're like a son who doesn't listen to his father. That was in chapter 21. Saying, you're like a worker in a vineyard who doesn't give the grapes back to the vineyard owner. That was in chapter 21. And then last in chapter 22, we saw him say, you're like somebody who's invited to a wedding banquet, but they don't come. You're missing out, Jesus said. You're missing out because you don't listen to God. And that's what Jesus would say to our country too, and our people in our world. He would say, you got to listen to God. You got to be one with God. You got to be with Jesus. Put your eggs in the Jesus basket, that whatever he says, whatever he wants, that's what or else you're going to be missing out. And then 3 different people came and confronted Jesus last week, a Pharisee, a Sadducee, an expert in the law. And Jesus made it clear that he's working on saving the world while they were worried about something else. Today, we're going to get what I think is maybe the hardest chapter in all of Matthew, maybe the hardest chapter in the Bible. It's Matthew chapter 23. And here's why I think it's hard. Jesus goes on a full attack against these guys. He says, woe to the Pharisees. That was the old school word for watch out, something terrible is happening. It brings me to our first question. As we go through this study, you may want to find a pen to write with. You may want to find some paper to jot things down. If you're watching with a group, you can discuss the questions. But you also may want a Bible to kind of refer to things. And I'll point you to your Bible. You can click the link below. It will take you to a spot where you can read the Bible online. You can always use a paper Bible. On the next page, you will see the words of chapter 23. And then, of course, you can watch it by clicking the link to the video Bibles down below. We're going to start with Matthew chapter 23, and I'm going to ask you a question about this. But just notice how many times he says, woe. In fact, this whole section is called the 7 woes. Jesus says, woe, watch out, something bad's going to happen to you, Pharisees. Here's the first question. What bad things could happen to a person if they put their hope in something that's not Jesus? What bad things could happen to a person if they put their hope in something that's not Jesus? Pause the video, talk about it, write about it, think about it, and we'll come back and talk about those answers a little bit. The main answer is what we're going to talk about in today's study. All I'm trying to do is prime your pump so you're starting to think about what people do. But the first way to answer that question is to say, well, what are people putting their hope in? People put their hope in money. People put their hope in politics. People put their hope in their health. People put their hope in their finances or in their stability for their future. And those are gifts from God, but if we ever pin our ultimate hope on them, we are going to have a different will than Jesus, and bad things can happen. Bad things like we get crushed. Bad things like we think God has abandoned us. Bad things that we're going to see Jesus expound in this section. Now we're going to take this in two chunks with a little intermission in the middle. The first chunk is the first half of the book. So feel free to click one of those links below. Feel free to grab your paper Bible and read through. But on the next screen, you are going to see the words of Matthew chapter 23, and I'll ask you some more questions. Let's continue with that on the other side. Here is Jesus teaching against hypocrisy from Matthew 23. Starts out with a warning against hypocrisy, and Jesus will have in his crosshairs the Pharisees. It is somewhat appropriate that Jesus would give his most vehement attack against the Pharisees because it is the Pharisees who have most commonly opposed him from the very beginning of his ministry. Here's what Jesus says. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat." Moses is, of course, the author of a bunch of the Old Testament. He was the leader of God's people. "So you must be careful to do everything they tell you." Notice this. Jesus has no problem with the words the Pharisees say when they are speaking from the book of Moses. He says, you can listen to the teaching of God's word from the Old Testament, but do not do what they do. You see this? Do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They are hypocrites. They tie up heavy and cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Notice Jesus has come to serve people and to give them rest from their burden, the burden being keeping the law of God, keeping the law of Moses. And so Jesus has come to take away our burden of sin and guilt. The Pharisees have come and have made their lives about increasing the burden on people's shoulders, and they don't help them move it. Everything they do, verse 5, everything they do is done for people to see. You'll see this come up all the time in this chapter. People to see. They're not doing it for God. They're doing it for people to see how good they are. A couple of examples Jesus gives. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. Phylacteries were little things that were supposed to show their dedication to God's word, their dedication to the scriptures. And Jesus says they make big phylacteries not because they are really so dedicated to God's word, but because they want people to think they are so dedicated. They're doing it for show. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They're not looking to sit in the front so they can hear better. They're not looking to be the preacher so they can help people understand God's word. They're doing it so that they can be loved, so that they can get honor. And then verse 7, they love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. Rabbi is a Hebrew word or Aramaic word. And the word Rab, if you just look at the first part of the word Rab or Rav in Hebrew means great, big, important, heavy, weighty. It means, wow, this is very serious and awesome. And so Rabbi means my great, awesome one, the guy I look up to. And so when people called Jesus rabbi, they were saying, Jesus, we look up to you as someone who's great. And what Jesus is saying about the Pharisees here is they love to be called great. Now, there's nothing wrong with calling somebody great. The trouble is that they were all about it. That's what they just loved more than anything else. And so their issue is that they were doing this all for themselves. They were serving themselves with religion instead of serving God with their religious life. They were doing it for themselves. Now Jesus gives them, the disciples, a different approach. His approach was never to do any of this stuff. Jesus, remember, he has a ministry to be a servant. He does it with meekness. These are all the antitheses of these things. He came in mercy, not to impose burdens on people, but to give them what they don't deserve. So Jesus tells the church, I have a different path for you, a better path for you. Here's what he says. You are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And you do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. And I love this, I love this section. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. That's an ominous thing. He's saying if you are a Pharisee or a teacher and you are exalting yourself, you will indeed be humbled. And so you see in this last little paragraph, starting in verse 8, that against the picture of self-assertion and boldness that the Pharisees had, Jesus gives a clear picture of a gentle church, the one that he wants, the one that's in his mold of meekness and ministry and mercy. It's a church where nobody uses the honor titles of father or rabbi, because we look up to God. We look up to Jesus, where no masters crowd out Christ, who is our true master, and where greatness comes to men by ministry, which exalts and uplifts little ones, the humblest ones. Jesus exalts these. So here's your second question for today. Give 3 examples of how you've seen verse 12 played out in the world. I'm looking at verse 12. That's this one. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Maybe you can think of an example of how that plays out in the secular world. Sometimes that happens. But maybe you can think of how it plays out in the church. So take a moment, jot down some answers, discuss them, pause the video, and we'll come back with some conversation. There are a few examples I can think of from the outside world. Sometimes people who are the most braggadocious, they are exalting themselves, and then the thing that they have been proclaiming about themselves turns out to be a sham. Either they're not as strong as they thought, they're not as good as they thought, someone bigger and stronger and more intelligent comes along, and so they are humbled. That happens in sports, that happens in business. I can think of examples in the church, though, of how sometimes the most effective people aren't the most talented, and sometimes they're not the most showy people. Sometimes the most effective servants in the church are the people who don't really gain much attention for themselves. There are so many people at Mount Olive Church who are serving behind the scenes. They're making the coffee, they're vacuuming up, they're picking up, they're watching the kids. Even maybe they're not working at church. They just care for those in their family. They call their relatives when they think they might be lonely. They pick up others so that they can bring them to church. Little unseen things. Jesus says that's the kind of service that makes the church awesome. It's not the people who have the very awesome titles. It's not necessarily the pastors or the leaders or the teachers. It is anyone who humbles themselves. That's why we want our pastors and our teachers and our leaders to be humble, so we also can be in the group that Jesus says is making the church awesome. But it's not about titles. It's about who serves. Well, after Jesus gives a little primer about how some people are doing this all for show, but the best things about the church are how they're not for show, then he goes on to start his 7 specific woes against the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. That starts in verse 13. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to." This is where we get our first woe. This is number 1. And The first woe that Jesus says is because you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. The obvious implication is that if the Pharisees managed their authority correctly, they could open the door to the kingdom of heaven. They could show people the way to be saved. That's because they sit in the seat of Moses, right? That's how Jesus started out. They sit in the seat of Moses, and so they could show people what God wants, but they don't. The first woe is because they shut heaven. Jesus says, watch out, you are closing heaven to people. The second woe is in verse 15. He says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you succeed, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Oh boy, so the second woe is, Jesus says, you make people worthy of hell. You make worthy of hell. Watch out, because you are making people not going to heaven, the opposite of number one, but you are making people to hell, and you're doing that by convincing them to obey God's law as a way to get to heaven. We should want to obey God's law out of thanks for what he's done for us, but nobody can obey God's law so well that they go to heaven. If you try, you will end up in hell. But now we've got our third question. It goes like this. How do you avoid getting in the way of God's work? That's what the Pharisees were doing, right? God made them authorities in the church. He gave them the ability to speak and have the writings. They knew more about Moses and the prophets than anyone else, and yet they didn't use that to help people. They got in the way of what God was doing. They did it by closing the kingdom of heaven, by proclaiming a different way than Jesus, and they did it by condemning people to hell by convincing them to obey God's laws. So how do you avoid getting in the way of God's work? Pause the video, write some ideas down, discuss it, and we'll come back with answers. One of the biggest ways is to not make God's work all about you. That was where the Pharisees started to go wrong, isn't it? They thought that God's work, being a spokesman for God and having his teachings, was about making them look better. I get to be called rabbi. I get to be number one. You need to listen to me. And they stopped paying attention to God. I think that's probably the simplest way. If we stay humble, that is, not draw the most attention to ourselves, but give all the glory to God, we will do a good job of staying out of the way of God's work. Anytime a preacher sets out to make himself good, make himself honored, make himself great, he's in deep trouble. Anytime an evangelist, even a person who just is sharing the message of Jesus with friends and family, if you're doing it so that you look good, you're going to get in the way of God's work. We do this to glorify God, to help people see Jesus, and to make Jesus look more awesome in the eyes of everybody we know. That's the key thing to getting out of the way of God's work. The third woe is found in verse 16. It says, woe. And so we're going to head for our third woe. Woe to you blind guides, Jesus says. You are blind guides. You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools. He calls them blind again. So obviously you can see he has a blind thing going. You are saying that you can show them the way to please God, but you're not showing them that. And the first example is about swearing, right? He says, if you say that you can swear by the temple, but not by the gold. That's not what God says. Continuing on, he says, you blind fools, in verse 17, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? Obviously, you can't swear by the temple or by the gold. You say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing, but whoever swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. He says, that's not true, Jesus says. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anybody who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it, that is, by God. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Jesus is making pretty clear that the third woe is about this. You make distinctions to avoid God's will. You say, well, you can do this, which is kind of what God said not to do, but as long as you don't do this way, then, and you're making distinctions God never made. Why? So that you can walk around doing things God doesn't want you to do, like swearing by the temple and swearing by God. He says you can't tell people this is the right way when you're doing the wrong thing. You're going the wrong way. Our fourth woe comes in the next section. It's in verse 23. Woe to you, he says. This is the fourth time we've heard it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give a tenth of your spices. Okay, so the tithe, remember, was an Old Testament law that said you should give 1/10 of your money. He says you give a tenth of not just your money, but even your spices. That means you're getting really down into the nitty-gritty, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter. You should have been just and merciful and faithful without neglecting the former, the tithing. You blind guides, you strain out the gnat and swallow a camel. See what he's saying? You get down to the nitty-gritty, straining out the gnat so you don't do anything technically wrong, but you're swallowing the whole camel. You're doing exactly bigger things that are wrong. Jesus, of course, in the earlier chapters, we have studied this 1 or 2 chapters ago. He said that the whole point of God's word, of God's law, is love, and that's exactly what the Pharisees were forgetting about. They weren't showing mercy and being faithful. They weren't showing love. They were only focused on the little things. When Jesus talked about justice, mercy, and faithfulness, he is almost certainly alluding to those Old Testament prophets, Amos and Hosea and Isaiah, and Micah especially. Micah said in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, "He, that is God, has showed you, man, what is good. What does God the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." It was exactly those things that they failed to do that Jesus wants us to do because they were so focused on the small pieces of the law. So the fourth woe is you don't do what God wants. The fifth woe is in verse 25 and 26. This is number 5. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but the inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. So you focus on the outside things without loving the inside things. You can still imagine people who do this. They are very concerned with making sure they look good on the outside, when on the inside they're actually greedy and self-indulgent. Jesus says, woe if that's the way you behave. This brings us to our next question. What is Jesus' problem with the Pharisees? By that I mean, what does he think they are doing wrong? Pause the video, write some things down, talk about it, and come back with some answers. Well, it seems like in a word, his issue would be hypocrisy. Maybe you notice that Jesus even calls them hypocrites in this section. And as he is calling them hypocrites, he means their outside actions are not the most important, but that's what they think is the most important. Their little details maybe make them look good, but their insides are not in line with that. That's what the last woe, or the second to last woe, the last woe in this section is all about. It's in verse 27, and he says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees. This is going to be number 6. You hypocrites, he calls them, right? So that's exactly what we were just talking about. You are like whitewashed tombs. So in the last section, he said you're like a cup that's dirty on the inside, clean on the outside. Now he says you're like a tomb. It looks beautiful on the outside. Nice headstone, washed white. It looks beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. That's gross for us. We're like, oh, that's gross to have bones and dead body on the inside, but even more impure for Old Testament people because those dead bodies would make you unclean. You couldn't worship the Lord. You couldn't go to the temple, ceremonially unclean if you touched a bone. And so bones were extra gross for sacred culture in the Jewish culture from the Old Testament. Verse 28, in the same way, on the outside you appear as righteous people, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. So he's saying the thing about the same thing as hypocrisy and wickedness, that's what makes you unclean, just like the dead and the bones. And on the outside you appear righteous, which is just like the whitewashed tombs. So you look good on the outside, like a tomb looks good on the outside, but you're dead on the inside, like a tomb has a dead body on the inside. So that's the last one. You are like tombs in your outside, inside. And let's ask one more question here. What are some possible motivations for hypocrisy? That's obviously what Jesus is identifying. He said hypocrites here. He said hypocrites here. He's saying your outsides don't match your insides. You're making strong efforts to look good when you aren't good. Hypocrisy is their issue, both back then and nowadays. What might motivate someone to be a hypocrite? Pause for a second, talk, discuss, write some things down. We'll come back with some answers. I think one answer could be laziness. It's easier to look good on the outside than it is to actually be good by doing things. For example, for the Pharisees, it's easier to tithe your dill and your cumin and your spices than it is to actually show justice and mercy when people need it. It takes a lot more time, a lot more patience to show mercy. Another answer could be pride. You want people to think you're good, and you'll get more praise if you look good on the outside than if you are working hard to be good on the inside. There could be other answers, but those are two that we could start with. Well, that's a wrap on our first section. We've seen 6 of the 7 woes. We've answered a couple questions about the Pharisees' issues, and we're going to do a quick transition and then come back and tackle the last woe and a conclusion. That's a lot of bad news. It's a lot of Jesus saying, whoa, watch out, something bad's going to happen. And he has to. Can you imagine going to a doctor and the doctor didn't tell you that you have cancer? It'd be the worst doctor ever. Well, Jesus is living with people who are putting their hope in something that's not going to deliver. They're wrong. And they're making bad decisions as a result of their wrong information, their wrong behavior. And so Jesus is warning them, watch out, bad things will happen if you keep on this path. I know this is hard to read, and for me, like I said at the beginning, this is one of the most challenging sections of the Bible, but we're going to keep going. The section from 29 to the end of this chapter doesn't get much better, but hopefully we'll find some great news as we see God's warning, as we heed God's warning, and as we align ourselves further and further from anybody who puts their hope in something that's not Jesus, because we're getting closer and closer to Jesus who always delivers. On the next screen, you'll see the words of the Bible. Feel free to read it in your paper Bible. There's another video link if you want to watch it on Lumo, or you can read it online. We'll continue on the next page with the analysis of chapter 23, verses 29 to the end. Well, we've got our last woe here. It's in verse 29, and Jesus says, woe. It is the 7th woe of the Pharisees. He says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He calls them hypocrites one more time. You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. Now, that's a good thing that they're doing on the outside. It looks good that you try to, bring flowers to the tomb of the prophets, like all the prophets from the Old Testament. And you say, verse 30, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So many of the prophets were killed by the leaders of Israel, and the Pharisees are saying, we would never have killed prophets. But verse 31, so you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. This is an eerie line here, isn't it? It's saying, you are going to, or why don't you go ahead and kill more prophets? Now they may be thinking, well, there is no more prophets. Of course, Jesus, the one speaking to them, is a prophet. And who's going to call for Jesus' blood? Who's going to send him to his grave? It's the Pharisees. The Pharisees will lead the people. And so the last woe that Jesus says is, you kill God's messengers. That's what the prophets were. Back in the old days, the prophets brought messages from God, and the Israelites killed them. Jesus is bringing a message from God, and the Pharisees are trying to kill him. Which brings me to question number 6. Who hates God's messengers today? What I'm proposing is that there are still people who feel about God's message from the Bible, from preachers, from prophets. There are still people who feel that way about God, as the Pharisees did. Who can you think of who fits that mold? Pause and discuss. We could probably point at a bunch of people. Of course, we can't be sure. Those who do the same things as the Pharisees would be prime candidates for saying you are people who hate God's messengers today. Perhaps it's people who are hypocritical. They don't live according to God's word, but they want people to think they do. Perhaps it's people who are just openly anti-Christian, who are trying to hurt and kill people. There are a lot of those, maybe not in our neck of the woods, but in foreign countries, sometimes you can get hurt, either socially hurt or physically hurt for standing up for God's word. But here's the most important point that I want to make here. I'm actually going to write this down. Everyone is tempted to do this. Everyone is tempted to do this. Here's what I mean. There are parts of God's word that you don't like. There are commands from God that make you uncomfortable. And so even though I pray that you keep on fighting against your temptation to avoid doing what God says, there's a temptation to that. I hope you fight against it. All of us feel what those Pharisees felt. The challenge is for Jesus' followers to go with God's word, to go with Jesus, to listen to his message instead of doing what we would rather do. Now, maybe the thing that gets under your skin about Jesus' teaching is what he says about marriage. Maybe what makes it really hard for you to follow Jesus is what he says about possessions and money. Maybe what makes it really hard for you is what he says about persecution, that we should expect it. Those are the kinds of things that made the ancient Israelites really uncomfortable too. When push came to shove, so many ancient Israelites chose to go with what was easier, what was more pleasant, than going with what Jesus wants. And so often, that's what we're tempted to do. We're tempted to be like the Pharisees and make ourselves look good, make ourselves feel better, make ourselves feel great, instead of doing what Jesus says. Everyone is tempted to hate God's message. But by God's grace, you believe God's message. Let's keep fighting to put God first, put ourselves second. Verse 33 helps us keep on rolling to the end of this chapter. He says, you snakes, Jesus says to the Pharisees, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore, I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Oh my goodness. Jesus says, you're on the road to hell. How will you escape being sent to hell? And then Jesus says, how will you escape? I will tell you. I'm going to send you prophets and sages and teachers. This is mercy. Some people say Jesus is so mean. How could Jesus be so mean? He's sending them help. He's sending them people to call them. The disciples would continue to witness to the Jewish people who rejected Jesus. The disciples and the apostles, after Jesus died and rose and ascended into heaven, would primarily try to reach the Jewish establishment who hated Jesus. And what would the Jewish establishment do? Well, that's what the next verse says. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah. So if you would read the Old Testament, Abel is the first guy to die for sticking up for God. Abel, the brother of Cain back in Genesis, he dies as a result of standing on his faith. And then Zechariah is in the Hebrew Bible the last guy who dies for standing up for his faith. And he's saying, so what Jesus is saying is, from beginning to end, this is what happens to faithful Christians when they come up against hypocrites in the Bible, and you are going to make more people die. He says, Abel, all the blood of the righteous Abel down to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. Jesus says you will be guilty when you reject God's message, just like Cain was guilty when he rejected Abel, just like your ancestors rejected Zechariah. You will be guilty if you reject Jesus. And yet Jesus' heart is not hard. He's not saying, good riddance, I hope you stay away. No, what does he say about this city who hates him, this city who has turned on him? He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, I hate you. No, of course he doesn't say that. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Who is the one who rejects who? Was it Jesus who wasn't willing? No, it was Jerusalem who was not willing. So Jesus says, have it your way. Look, your house is left to you desolate. You may have been pinning your hopes on a Messiah who would be great, on a Messiah who would kick out the Romans. You may have been hoping that I would be different. You may have been hoping that you were the good ones and I was the bad one. You may have been hoping, but if that's how you build your hope, you're going to have an empty house. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Our last question for today. Jesus has talked about all these crazy things that the Pharisees do. He said, woe to you, watch out because you're doing something horrible. Question is this: how do you feel about this confrontational Jesus? Some people maybe sometimes take issue with the idea of feelings, saying it doesn't matter how I feel, all that matters is the truth. And that's accurate when it comes to doctrine. I don't care if you like it or not. Jesus said what he said. But our feelings can be good at revealing what's going on in our souls. Sometimes we don't like what we see in the Bible, and it's important for us to notice that. And some people really like what they see in this part of the Bible, and it's important for us to notice that. So, discuss this. How do you feel about this confrontational Jesus from Matthew 23? I could imagine some people who feel really unsettled that Jesus would say all these harsh things, that he would foretell how the Pharisees would condemn him. I can also see others who get some comfort from it, who say, so I'm not the only one who people hate. Yeah, that's right. People hated Jesus too. Jesus comforted his followers by saying, if they rejected me, they will reject you too. And here we have exactly that. Pharisees rejecting Jesus. I could see other people saying, I feel very sad that Jesus needs to do this. I feel sad that Jesus has to condemn. And if you feel that way, then you are feeling the same way that Jesus is. He is sad. There's a great extended quote from Martin Franzmann that captures how we might react to this confrontational Jesus. This is from his book, Follow Me. Here's what Martin Franzmann says. This is in an austere Christ. The grace of his ministry, his mercy, and his meekness cast a very dark shadow. So dark a shadow that men have sought to get rid of it by critical operations on Matthew. Operations designed to leave us with a Christ less harsh than his gospel gives us. So he's just saying some people try to get rid of this chapter in the Bible. They try to explain it away by saying, well, Jesus wasn't really meaning that. He didn't really say that. Perhaps we should get rid of chapter 23. And he says, when you do that, you get a Christ that's not the one the Bible tells us about. But if we excise the shadow, we shall excise the grace too. For the grace of the Christ appears in these words too, indissolubly linked with his austerity. You can't separate them. The cry of woe, heard so often in this discourse, is not merely a cry of wrath, but a cry of wrath mingled with grief. And Jesus uses one of his most moving images just here to depict his yearning grief over the city which he must condemn. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. Jesus' whole will of ministry and mercy is in those words, and for him it is the unplumbed mystery of malice that his call to Jerusalem should have gone unheeded. See what he's saying? He's saying, even Jesus struggled to understand why people would reject him the way they did. What Jerusalem has done is for him an utter perversion, in the highest degree unnatural as that a chick should not respond to the clucking of a hen, and you would not, is the expression of his anguished wonderment at what Jerusalem has done with God's supreme gift to Jerusalem. Only a love that is willing to expend itself in complete self-giving could feel so deeply and doom so darkly the refusal of that love. Jesus is so harsh because he loves the Pharisees so much. He loves you and I that much too, which is why he's left this harsh part of his message in the Bible so that we would be warned, so that we could avoid walking the same path as the Pharisees, so that we could end up in his wings as his children. A lot of warnings. Another batch of warnings about the bad things that can happen if you put your hope in something besides Jesus. But don't miss the last words Jesus said. He said, I tell you the truth, you will not see me again. And he means you will not see with your eyes of faith. You will not know me again until the day when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Maybe you're having a flashback. That's what people said when Jesus rode into Jerusalem to save the world, when on Palm Sunday he came. Later that week, the children cried out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even when the adults had stopped. But there's coming a day, Jesus says, there's coming a day when all will say that. From people who love him and people who reject him, we will all recognize that Jesus is coming in the name of the Lord. He is the conquering hero. He is the king of the universe. That day is coming for you too. When Jesus returns in glory, all people will recognize him. So let's recognize him as that now. Let's put our hope in Jesus. Let's put our eggs in the Jesus basket, not in the money basket, not in the politics basket, not in anything else. There lives inside you and there lives inside me a religious man, a hypocritical person, a woman who is obsessed with rules and regulations, who doesn't like what Jesus says. That person lives in us because sin lives in us. All of us have a bit of Pharisee, and so all of us need to hear Jesus' watch out chapter. My last question is a hard one. What part of this prompts you to change something you're doing? What part of chapter 23 prompts you to change something you're doing? I'll give you a couple options to tackle this question before I turn you loose to talk or discuss or write. One is to think, when I say what part of this, you can just review. Just pull up chapter 23 and maybe you read through again and just look for a section. And then when I say prompts you to change something, it could be something you're doing that you're going to change because of what Jesus warns us about. Maybe it's something you're thinking, a habit that you think about, a way you evaluate people or a situation that you're going to change because of what Jesus warns you about. Maybe it's some words you say. Think about your brain, your mouth, your actions. What part of this prompts you to change something you're doing because of what Jesus warns us about? Talk about that. We'll come back with some wrap-up thoughts. Finally, I don't know what section spoke to you the most. I won't tell you what one spoke to me because finally it's not important. I'm not worried about what you said, and you're not worried about what I said. Jesus is speaking to our hearts. Here's some great news. No matter what you need to fix up in your life, according to Jesus' warnings, he loves you. He loves you enough to die on the cross. He died on the cross for these Pharisees, and his desperate wish was that they would put their faith in him. So you put your faith in him. Some of these Pharisees let Jesus down, and they didn't trust him, and so they ended up in hell. Some of these Pharisees turned and trusted Jesus. There were Pharisees in the early Christian church, and you and I are like that. Let's put our trust in Jesus so that we will not fear the day of judgment. Instead, we will wait expectantly to say, "Blessed are you, Jesus, who comes in the name of the Lord." May God bless you as you wait for that day. I'd love it if you'd signed up and let me know that you watched this. You can sign in by clicking the link below. There's a link below that you can sign in, or just type into a browser tinyurl.com/MOMatthew23, because this is a study of Matthew 23. You can also use your smartphone to scan the code that's on the screen here. Just scan that code with your phone, and it will bring up the right page. Sign your name, ask any questions, and we'll answer those questions in future videos. Until next time, God bless you, and I'll see you as we take on Matthew 24.